Hey guys, I'm Dan Markham. I wrote the domain model for domain modeling, and I'd like to talk to you today about object-oriented ontologies and learning at scale. I wrote the domain model for domain modeling as part of a book to organize information around building project backlogs. It sort of grew into how to organize project information in general, and that's really all about learning. So when a technology team meets a customer, learns what they need the program to do, they have to sort of go into a new world, establish sort of a common language, establish a mezzanine language between the technology and the team, and then create a science or sort of an automated process that then the customer and the team can use to explore this new world of dentistry or whatever the domain is. A lot of fascinating stuff goes on there. So finish that, and the two books that follow up, the first one's sort of more practical, how to organize your code, which is really cool, coming along great. The third book, really the biggest thing about that's going to be sort of learning at scale, and I needed a theory of how learning happens in general. And I don't have to solve the world's problems. I don't know everything, and I know this is sort of a theory of everything kind of thing. But guys, this is programming, and we're perfectly fine with just making shit up until we get stuff working. And that's what I really want to do here, is just sort of establish some symbology and drawings to the point we can get some traction on what learning is. Probably not the right symbols, probably not the right drawings, but doing anything. Sort of, this is one of the rules that we learn from day one. Establish mathematical symbols that we can explore a domain with beats nothing. So even if we're wrong, we're cool. We can just keep going until we figure out why we're wrong and come back to it. So this is much more like jazz than philosophy or math, and I apologize for that, but we need to start somewhere, and I think we have such a corpus of knowledge that now's the time to do that. That's all this sort of prelude stuff out of the way. So I was working on this theory of learning, and there's a whole ton of stuff that comes into theory of learning. There's education from Dewey. There's machine learning. There's the Bayesian brain. There's the frequentist idea of what science is. There's actually the philosophy of science. It kind of goes on a bit. I ran across this book last week. My friend Michael Feathers recommended it to me. And it is Object-Oriented Ontology, a new theory of everything. This is a guy who knows how to write subtitles, okay? He's not like Object-Oriented Ontology, hey, give me $10. It's like theory of everything here. Good book. The guy comes from an architecture background, which I found kind of fascinating because he's looking at sort of systems of meaning around artistic expression, which was like most cool. There's a lot of ground in phenomenology. There's Socrates. There's a ton of stuff here. So whatever I say is going to be wrong, and I'm going to be skimming. I'm not going to keep apologizing, but there's just a whole bunch of caveats. This guy basically comes up with the idea that there's sort of the things we sense, and then there's the things that are. And then there's the real things that we sense and the real things that are, and we can never sort of actually interact with those real objects. It's almost sort of trans-Platonic. There's an Uber table that we would never ever see. It's not that it's a perfect table, it's that we'd have no access to it by way of learning, which is kind of neat. I kind of see where he's going with this, because we've had sort of a long history of trying to separate and disambiguate things that I experience with things that are, and is there a real life? Is it just fantasy? Caught in a landslide. There's a whole song there that we don't have to go into. So yeah, that was good thing. A good book. I made about page 200, but 2/3 of the way through, he starts going off into sort of a bunch of other stuff that I wasn't interested in. The thing about philosophy is, if you want to spend your entire life studying one philosopher, you can. Or you can just sort of grab what you need and move on. So I grabbed what I needed, and we're moving on. All right, so like with everything, we must draw a diagram. This is my taking this guy's diagram and applying what I was already working with this learning at scale. This is what I consider currently to be learning at scale, and I might change this as the book progresses, but I think it's at a point now I can start talking about it and sort of putting some stakes in the ground. If we look at the bottom level, this is basic life, an amoeba, a dog, or whatever. On the left-hand side, we have what the qualities of something are, our sensory experiences around those things. Now, in the middle column, we have what he calls objects. For our purposes, it's just some sequence of behavior or a node graph, an object graph, a concept graph that has at least one item in it. Maybe it's just a behavior, maybe it's just a behavior and an object, or maybe it's a behavior and two objects. That's not neither here nor there, but that's what we will consider to be an object for purposes of this diagram. So we have sensory on the left, we have this behavior object chain in the middle, and on the right, sort of things that kind of interesting, is what I called supplementals in the first book. Basically, it's just the things that always must be true. And so if we'll take a baby as an example, at the bottom level here, that the baby cries, the baby feels upset for some reason, the baby cries, which would be the behavior in the middle part, and a light comes on. So then there's a second sensory perception with a second object that creates a chain of object, behavior, object, and the baby thinks, well, every time I cry, the light will come on. That's the supplemental. And of course, there's no reason for the baby to think that. Very small infants really can't distinguish between themselves and the outside world. But our brains just basically create these sort of patterns of sensory input, object, sensory input, object, and then I'll predict the next in that chain and just claim that's always going to be true. I call that religion. You call it whatever you want to. This is the way our brains work, no matter who we are. Mr. Spock is the same as everybody else. Religion is not a bad word here. So this is just our personal inner life, our subjective life, without sort of any intelligence at all. I would argue that probably a potted plant could do this. From there, we move up to the abstract level. And you would think that abstract would be at the top, but it's not. Abstract is actually our internal abstractions, because each of us has a different set of internal abstractions around any concept. And there we have an abstract set of qualities, an abstract set of objects, and an abstract set of supplementals. If I were every time I throw this hand grenade, it makes a big boom. I do that several times, and through the use of abduction, I go to that far right column, and I say all hand grenades, when the pin is pulled and thrown, they go boom. That's what I would consider intelligence. If you see the far right column, that's intelligence. That's the ability to reason at the abstract level, not internally. Not about your own feelings, about how things might be in general. And there's both being too specific here and being too general here. There's just a ton of stuff. Moving to the third level is conversational. And conversational is where analysis comes into play. And basically, we all have our inner lives at the bottom. And from that inner lives, we all sort of make up our own sort of theory of how the world works, which is intelligence. And combining those together through the use of language, we come up with sort of a joint theory of how the world should work. And that's really what we've been doing for about 2,500, 3,000 years now. And that process of hypothesis, sharing internal mental models, aligning those, and then through an induction sort of realizing what will happen in the future,